kind of introduction until you end in the end on the street.
So maybe I can start also when you say like this cooperation started many years ago and then now this week, so that it has to do with a lot of crossing temporalities that are happening right now. So it's a story about like the beginning of our relationship, because I'm part of the university, of the Aachen University, so it has to do with the temporality of this relation between the university and the POM conference series, which was part of what happened this week at the university in Aachen, but also it has to do with the temporality of our relationship. So we were very interested in working together and we were finding ways to do so, and somehow like the stream of temporality that was crossing between the POM conference and the EWTH University cross paths with our possibilities of cooperation, and it's also part of like the cooperation with a lot of people who are sitting here. So it's actually a very weird experience to be like here talking about the POM conference, where I think like all of the experts on the POM conference are actually sitting around. But well, maybe that's an opportunity also for you to invite you to have conversations with all of them during this night when we're crossing through the studios and visiting, or tomorrow. So yeah, for me, it has to do with this experience of like crossing paths and streams and different temporalities from you, from the team, from POM, from the university.
And we were so much thinking about in the beginning how we can kind of come over the gap between Aachen and Essen, which is quite far. And maybe I have to mention that there's a long history, not only in our cooperation, but a longer one about the mine, which has been only derived or constructed through the knowledge of the engineers of RWTH Aachen. So the engineers of RWTH Aachen did build up this mine here. So the story is really long. And now I think we are going into a new phase, which is some more metabolic, or something more about exchange, more about cooperation, more about thinking about a sustainable future and not an exploitative relation to everything what happens. I think it's a very, very important, for me, a very, very important moment. And thanks so much, it was a fantastic work until now together. And we will continue.
Thank you. And that's actually a perfect way to go into this part. Because I think like also this cooperation is a lot about trust, or for me it felt like it was a lot about trust. On the one hand, because I was saying like the conference we had this week at the university is part of a larger series, which is called Politics of the Machines. So it's a conference series that was organized, or it was like started by Lara Bella from the Aalto University and Morten Sondergaard from the Aalborg University. And for me, it was like, yeah, the beginning of this conference at the university in Aachen was a lot about trust, because this conference, before it happened in Aachen, happened in Copenhagen, and in Beirut, and in Berlin, and then everyone is wondering, like, why Aachen? And this is a great question I ask myself. So how did, like, Martin and Lara, but also Hassan and Joe trusted that this could happen in this small place we were in last week? So yeah, I think, like, to start, I would also like to just thank everyone who trusted this project. Also, like, Gabriele Gramensberger, the director of our center at the university in Aachen, who also trusted that this could happen, that this was a kind of conversation we wanted to have. But I think like a lot of this trust, I was saying that for me is very important, like as part of the project of this conference, is also like the trust between the team that made it possible, and of course their labor. So I also wanted to start thanking our team and everyone who was involved and working to make this possible. This last 4 days, it felt like 4 years, but it was 4 days. And then now also like these 2 days here in Essen. And we also, talking about temporalities and cooperations, had a cooperation with this amazing space in Aachen we just met, which is a para-academic philosophy space called Logoy. And there we also had a small exhibition So also like the artists involved in this exhibition, they really wanted to make this happen. So to make an exhibition in a space that is like the university space, that they do not know what an exhibition requires, how this movement in space works. It's a challenge, and I think that all of the artists were very interested in making it happen, so I also wanted to thank them for the trust too. We also had like a series of workshops happening during the conference, so I also want to thank everyone involved in the workshops who took part of them. But maybe now I can also tell you like what exactly is this conference series and how exactly it's like realized or concretized in the form of our conference we just had the last 4 days. For those who haven't been there, for those who have been there, well, now you are the experts on it. So the conference series is called Politics of the Machines, as I was saying, and it started with the first edition in 2018 in Copenhagen. And the idea behind it, or as Laura Morgan will say, is that it's to question or to open questions about how to think about the forms we perceive the world when machines are like taking over our interactions with space and time and how we move around those two coordinates. And I thought like this was a very good opportunity for us in Aachen to open those questions, because so for me it's important to think about how we organize knowledge. And I think like opening up the spaces, like academic spaces, it's a very important movement to reorganize knowledge. So we have always like kind of this distribution that is given by the institution, by the space, by the people working at a certain place, by capital and money, and how is it possible to redistribute knowledge and open it up to other flows, let's say. And so that's why I wanted to take this opportunity to bring like this conference series to precisely try to open up the space of the university, especially because we are in an engineering university, as Stefan was saying. So how can we cooperate between artists, practitioners, academics, activists? So I wanted to have a conversation about how can we together, from these very different fields, reorganize knowledge beyond those boundaries that are given by the space, like as well, institutions and distribution of capital. So I don't think that it's possible to do all of this with one conference, of course. But I think it's a good opportunity just to think how do we do it at all. And the conference series is a lot about this, like how do we create formats to be able to reorganize knowledge. And this edition, we decided to run the conference under the topic of life, likeness, and beyond. So for those of you who haven't heard about the concept of life, likeness, so the idea behind it is that it names the kind of activity that technology or technological objects have that show or appears as if the technological objects were alive, or they have like some kind of purpose that makes them look in a certain way as if they were alive. So like this concept of life likeness opens up the question of what make us think that something is alive or not. When do we see life? When do we recognize the organic and when the inorganic? And what are the boundaries between those things? But the idea behind the idea of beyond was to think also like, so in a sense, we have realized that these boundaries don't really work, to think in terms of like very differentiated organic and inorganic. And now the question is like, what do we do when we have crossed this threshold? So what is beyond that? Now we know, or we think, maybe it's not so different when I'm online and when I'm here in this space. Maybe like the things that I do online have an influence in the way we live and we move in this kind of in the analog space. But then, like, still that does not answer the question of how do we want to live together, or what kind of communities are built when we have opened up those thresholds and those limits. And that's the idea behind this Lifelikeliness and Beyond edition of the conference. So to think together about like new ways to, what ways do we want to live together, or do we want to build community with each other? And so for the conference, there was like a call for topics. We got like 11 amazing topics that go from like the question about like death, or what is the space of the extended reality of the digital, and so what kind of bodies and body imaginations are inhabiting these new spaces that are open in the thresholds between the analog and the digital, and many other different topics. I hope you can also look at them in our website at some point. And across those topics, we had a lot of conversations that I think precisely open those questions about like, so what does it even mean to talk about like, a life when we have to cross these thresholds between the organic and the inorganic? But for me, it's not only a question of how do we distinguish between them, but even like a question of like what kind of politics emerge out of it. Like we cannot distinguish between this organic and inorganic. And for me, it's a political question because it kind of redefines the way in which we think about what is a life that we want to live. So we could think like, of course, we had some conversations, for example, about like the microbiome and like this like different scales in which life is determined. And I think what is important is always to remember that it's not so much about where do we find now the difference. So now that we know about this possibility to manipulate cells, or like to create algorithms that are based on certain ideas of the living, so that does not bring us new ideas of what is life, or how we distinguish life from the non-living, but rather like opens up other possibilities to think of the politics of different scales. So I was thinking the whole time during the conference about scale. Like sometimes we heard a keynote, a fantastic keynote by Hannah Landecker, who was talking about like this very microscopic world. And I was thinking like, yeah, so how do we think about politics across scales? On the one hand, like on the large scale, when I was saying like, how do we want to live and what is a life that is worth living? So we could say, we can think in terms of geographies, maybe like in a bigger scale, but we also were talking about like this microscopic world determining the form even we enjoy things, we taste things, which was like also the topic of this lecture. But also like the scale of those algorithms determining life, so taking decisions over which lives are like the lives that are worth living and lives that we don't care for, and how those algorithms cross those scales, and they can have like these huge streams of data, and at the same time be like this invisible for us, so in a sense being microscopic. So what I wanted to say is like the conference was for me like an opportunity to think about like how like politics goes across all of these scales, and it's not just about like micro and micro, but it's more about like this crossing different thresholds. But we have talked about also certain forms of spirituality. So we also had a fantastic keynote by Manuela de Barros, who I think is sitting around. Who was talking about the relationship between technology and magic. And when I was listening to this talk, I was thinking like this was one of the topics we really wanted to address with the conference, which is also how do we think about the past when we talk a lot about the future. So we think about like sci-fi being this scenario of utopias where everything is going to be like this paradise of very clean landscapes. But I was thinking, that maybe that's why it's important to think about these new forms of spirituality, that when we think about the future, we kind of have to revisit the past and how this past is like crossing over our bodies right now. So we're staying here, but at the same time, we are not just standing in space, but there is like all of this history crossing our bodies right now. And how do we revisit our past based on certain ideas of what we think that should be possible in the future? So I really love that Manuela also brought this concept of magic by Giordano Bruno, a philosopher of the Renaissance, who says that magic is the knowledge with the power to act. And I was thinking that this is a very political term, or understanding what magic is supposed to be. And precisely, like, this is what makes technology so so ambivalent, because so magic can be used to precisely to act in a certain way, and on the other hand, it can be also used to prevent us from act. As I was saying, for example, with this kind of algorithms that decides over our lives without taking our power away to act in a certain way. So I guess for me, the conference was, as I was saying, just like kind of an opportunity to rethink how do we want to live together. So now that we think there is no possibility to order the world between like this binary between like organic and the inorganic, so how do we even want to live together and cooperate? And how do we cooperate with technology? So we think also like cooperation is like kind of a term that applies for the way we act with other humans, or maybe sometimes also with non-humans. But what about these non-humans being technologies? How do we cooperate with technology? And I'm really looking forward for the work of our artists, the artists that PACT have invited for this event, because I think they will address this question also, like how do we cooperate with machines? So I'm just like showing you my perspective from the conference, of course, and letting you know what I saw based on what was framed by this lifelikeNess and beyond. Because of course you always put a platform there when you do an event, a conference, but then everyone here in this room fill it in. And I can only tell you like my perspective from it, what I saw, where I was situated, what conversations happened across my body when I was in this space of the conference. And of course, I wanted also to thank you. That's the intention of this slide. And I'm just looking forward to have conversations about that, like what kind of communities do we want to build, and maybe we can have those conversations here, precisely not in this format of the conference, which is always like talking into like this, receiving information the whole time. And I hope like we can like digest some of those informations in these 2 days. And I'm looking forward to see the work of all of you, the other artists who are here. Thank you.
Thank you.